The goblet hit the stone floor before Miranda even realized she had knocked it over. She stood in the center of the great hall, candles burning in their iron sconces above her, the smell of roasted meat and pine smoke thick in the air, and she stared at the dais where Ezra sat on his carved oak throne, with Celeste standing beside him, wearing Miranda's mother's pearls around her throat. Her mother's pearls. The ones Miranda had been promised since she was 7 years old. Celeste caught her staring. Smiled. Slow and deliberate and sweet, the way a person smiles when they've won something and they want you to know exactly how completely you've lost. Miranda picked up her skirts and walked out. She made it to the eastern corridor before the shaking started. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, the silk of her gown whispering against the floor, and she pressed both hands flat against her stomach and breathed. In, out, in. The torchlight made shadows leap across the vaulted ceiling like things alive. She was 4 weeks along. She had known for 3 days. She had told no one. She was about to tell him tonight. That was why she had dressed carefully. The deep green gown, her dark hair pinned with the silver clasp he had given her after the solstice hunt, the faint perfume of rosewater and cedar she knew he had once pressed his face against her neck to breathe in, slow and reverent, like she was something sacred. She had stood in front of her chamber mirror for an hour and told herself it would be all right. She had been a fool. She pushed off the wall, straightened her spine and went to find him. Not because she wanted to. Because she had to. Because there was a child growing inside her and she would not, under any circumstances, let that child come into this world without looking their father in the eye and demanding he answer for what he was. She found Ezra in his study after the feast broke up. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She pushed through the heavy door and stepped into the warm amber glow of a room lined with maps and mounted candles and the mounted skull of the first wolf Ezra had ever hunted, which he kept not as a trophy but as a reminder. He had once told her of what it cost to take a life. He was at his desk. He looked up when she entered, and for one devastating second the mask slipped. His eyes moved over her face with something raw and immediate that he hadn't yet learned to hide quickly enough. Then it was gone. "Miranda. I need to speak with you," she said. She clasped her hands together in front of her so he wouldn't see them shaking. "Alone. Tonight. Now." He studied her for a moment, then stood, and gestured for the 2 guards flanking the bookcase to leave. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence was enormous. "You're going to announce her," Miranda said. "Not a question. Celeste. At the Winter Court. You're going to announce her as your chosen mate." Something moved across his face. Carefully controlled. "It's the right alliance for the..." "She was wearing my mother's pearls, Ezra." The words landed hard. He had the decency, at least, to look away. "Those were mine," Miranda said, her voice dropping to something very quiet and very dangerous. "You went into my chamber, and you gave her something that was mine. She asked for them. And you gave them." She let that sit in the air between them for a moment. Then she stepped forward, closed the distance between them until she was near enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes, near enough to remember every single moment that had built the tether between them, the mate bond, that luminous and merciless thing, which even now was pulling at her chest like a hook in her ribs. "I am your mate. The moon goddess herself bound us. You felt it, I felt it, every wolf in this castle with half a nose can smell it, and you are standing here choosing my sister. I am alpha of this pack," Ezra said, and his voice was the command voice now, deep and resonant and pressurized in a way that pushed against every omega instinct in her blood. "My decisions are not subject to. I am carrying your child." The command voice stopped. The fire popped. The world held its breath. Ezra stared at her. For the first time in 3 years of knowing this man, Miranda watched something crack open behind his eyes that she had never seen before. Something unguarded and enormous. Something that, in a different story in a different world, would have been the beginning of everything. But this was not that story. She watched him feel it and she watched him choose. Not her. Not his child. Not the bond humming between them like a live wire. She watched him look at the ceiling, jaw tight, and she understood. With the kind of clarity that only comes when something inside you quietly, permanently dies. That he had been hoping she wouldn't say it. That she would just disappear quietly. That this inconvenient, stubborn, too fierce Omega would make it easy for him and simply cease to be a problem. "How far?" he asked. Far enough, she said. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her and she absolutely hated, that even now, even in this moment he was so devastatingly present. So real. He reached out and for one airless second she thought he was going to touch her face. He didn't. You'll be given a chamber in the East Tower tonight, he said. In the morning my steward will arrange your departure from Ironvale lands. You'll be given coin, an escort as far as the border, and departure. The word came out barely above a whisper. It's the safest. You're sending me away. She looked at him. You're sending away your mate and your unborn child because my sister asked you for my mother's pearls. He said nothing. And that silence, that careful, cowardly, deliberate silence, was louder than anything he could have spoken. Miranda took one step back. Then another. Her skirts pulled around her feet like something spilling, and she thought, distantly, that this was the most absurd way to have her heart destroyed. Standing in a candlelit study in a silk gown, like something out of a painting, while the man she loved chose the frame over the subject. I, Ezra Voss, Alpha of the Ironvale Pack. He began. Look at me when you do it, she said. If you're going to take the bond from me, you will look at me while you do it. His eyes found hers. And she held his gaze while he unmade her. She felt every word of the rejection like a blade drawn slowly through the center of her chest. The bond, their bond, the thing that the moon goddess had decided meant something, unraveled thread by thread, and the sound that came out of her was not a scream, it was something worse, something quieter, a single broken exhale that she could not hold back no matter how hard she tried. Ezra flinched like she had struck him. Good. You are exiled from Ironvale, he finished. Effective at dawn. Miranda straightened. She smoothed her hands down the front of her gown. She reached up, slowly and deliberately, and unpinned the silver clasp from her hair, the one he had given her after the solstice hunt, and she set it on the edge of his desk. She looked at him one final time. I hope she was worth it, she said. I hope every single day with her feels like what you gave up. She turned and walked to the door. Miranda. Her hand was on the iron handle. The child, she said without turning around, will be extraordinary. And you will never know them. She walked out. Down the long torchlit corridor, down the servants' stair, through the cold kitchen, out into the night where the frost was sharp on the cobblestones and the full moon watched from above like a witness. She had nothing but the gown on her back and the fire in her chest and the small, impossible, precious life she was already willing to burn the world to protect. She did not look back at the castle. Not once. But somewhere deep in her bones, in the place where the bond used to live, she made a promise. Not to him, not to the moon goddess, not to the pack that had just thrown her out like something disposable. To herself. They would remember her name. The kingdom of Ashenmoor rose out of the fog like something that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be real. Miranda saw it first as torchlight, distant amber scattered across the hillside like fallen stars, and she urged the old mare she had traded her silver earrings for into a faster walk, because the cold had gotten into her bones 2 hours ago and the baby was restless and she had not eaten since yesterday morning. She had been walking, riding, and hiding for 11 days. Her green silk gown was ruined. Mud-stained to the knee, torn at the left shoulder where she had caught it on a thornbush crossing the border forest, the hem so ragged she had eventually taken a rock to it and cut the whole thing off at the ankle just to stop tripping. Her dark hair was loose and tangled. Her hands were raw. She had a bruise along her jaw from a run-in with a border guard who had decided an unescorted woman on a tired horse was worth troubling, and who had decided very quickly afterward, when Miranda broke 2 of his fingers without blinking, that she was not. She looked like nothing. Like nobody. That was the plan. Ashenmoor's outer gates were still open when she arrived. Barely, the guards in the middle of hauling them closed for the night. And she slipped through with a merchant's cart and a crowd of travelers and kept her head down and her hood up and her eyes moving. The city was bigger than she expected. Cobblestone streets wide enough for 2 carriages. Buildings of dark stone with arched windows. Candlelight burning behind thick glass. A cathedral at the top of the hill with a tower so high it disappeared into the low clouds. And at the center of everything, dominating the skyline the way a king dominates a room simply by existing in it, the Ashenmoor Castle. Black stone. 4 towers. Banners the color of midnight blue and silver hanging from the parapets, snapping in the wind. It looked like something built to last past the end of the world. Miranda looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked for an inn. She found one on a narrow side street called the Thorn and Bell, the kind of establishment that asked no questions and expected none answered, which suited her entirely. She paid for 2 nights with the last of the coin she had, took a room on the 2nd floor, and ate the bowl of stew the innkeeper's daughter brought up without tasting it, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed with her hands wrapped around the bowl and her eyes on the fire. Then she lay down and she slept for 14 hours straight. She woke to sunlight and voices below the window and the baby moving. A small, firm, insistent flutter that had started 3 weeks ago and still, every single time, made her breath catch. She pressed her palm to her stomach. "I know," she whispered. "I'm figuring it out." The baby moved again. "I said I'm figuring it out. Give me a moment." She got up, washed her face in the cold basin, did what she could with her hair, changed into the plain wool dress she had traded for in a village 3 days back. Brown, shapeless, the kind of garment that made a woman invisible in a crowd, which was exactly what she needed. She had come to Ashenmoor for one reason. Her mother had told her years ago, in one of those quiet late-night conversations that daughters only understand the importance of after their mothers are gone, that if Miranda ever found herself truly alone, truly cornered, with nowhere left to go and no one left to trust, she should find her way to Ashenmoor. She should go to the cathedral on the hill, and ask for a woman named Sister Etta. "She'll know who you are," her mother had said, smoothing Miranda's hair back with a steady hand. "And she'll know what to do." Miranda had been 12. She had filed it away in the back of her mind under things that would never be necessary. She was 22, exiled, pregnant and alone. It was time to find Sister Etta. The cathedral was a 20-minute walk from the inn, uphill all the way, through streets that grew progressively wider and more populated the higher she climbed. Market stalls, blacksmiths, a herbalist with bundles of dried lavender hanging in her doorway. Soldiers in the midnight blue and silver livery of Ashenmoor standing at corners, watching the flow of foot traffic with the particular alertness of men who had been told something specific to look for. Miranda didn't know what they were looking for. She kept walking. She was 20 feet from the cathedral steps when someone grabbed her arm. She spun, already reaching for the short blade she kept in her boot, and stopped. It was a woman. Old, slight, wearing the plain gray robes of the cathedral order. Her white hair pinned severely back from a face that was all sharp lines and sharp eyes and something else. Something that Miranda couldn't name immediately. Something that felt like recognition. "Don't," the old woman said quietly. "Not the arm, not the blade." She was looking at Miranda's face, studying it with an intensity that made Miranda's skin prickle. "Don't make a scene. Not here. Not today." "Who are you?" Miranda said. "My name is Sister Etta," the woman said. "And you look exactly like your mother, girl, which means every soldier in this city is going to recognize you by nightfall if you keep walking around in broad daylight." She tightened her grip on Miranda's arm. "Come with me. Now. Through the side door." Miranda went. The inside of the cathedral was cool and dim, all soaring stone arches and candles burning in long rows before carved alcoves. Sister Etta moved fast for a woman her age, pulling Miranda through a side corridor, down a narrow stair, into a low-ceilinged room that smelled of old books and beeswax. She shut the door, turned around, and looked at Miranda's stomach. Her expression shifted. Not shock exactly. More like confirmation. Like a woman checking off the last item on a list she had been maintaining for a very long time. "You're with child," she said. "Yes. The father. Gone." Miranda kept her voice flat. "Not relevant." Sister Etta said nothing for a moment. Then she crossed to a heavy oak chest in the corner, unlocked it with a key she wore around her neck, and drew out something that made Miranda go completely still. It was a portrait. Small, painted on wood, the colors still vivid. A woman in a deep blue gown, dark hair, strong jaw, dark eyes with something fierce and untamed living in them. Miranda was looking at her own face. Except it wasn't her. The gown was wrong, the style too old. And around the woman's neck, painted with careful detail, a silver pendant. A crescent moon split down the middle, with a wolf's head rising from the break. Miranda had never seen that pendant in her life. But she knew it. She knew it the way you know something in your blood rather than your memory, a knowing that came from somewhere older and deeper than experience. Who is she? Miranda asked, though her voice had gone strange. Your grandmother, Sister Etta said. The last Alpha Queen of Ashenmoor. Killed in the purge 18 years ago when the King's Council decided that a female Alpha on the throne was a threat they weren't willing to tolerate. She paused. They killed her. They killed her daughter, your mother, or so they thought. Your mother escaped. She ran, changed her name, joined a minor pack, and spent the rest of her life making sure you were ordinary enough to survive. The room was very quiet. I'm not ordinary, Miranda said slowly. No, Sister Etta agreed. You are the heir to the Ashenmoor throne. You always were. And the child you are carrying, if the father carries Alpha blood. He does, Miranda said, her voice flat as stone. Then your child, Sister Etta said carefully, is the most powerful wolf born in a century. 2 Alpha royal lines converged in one blood. She held Miranda's gaze. Which is why the current king has had soldiers looking for you for the past 3 weeks. Someone told him you were coming. Miranda's blood went cold. The current king, she repeated. Dorian Voss, Sister Etta said. Ezra's uncle. The portrait dropped from Miranda's fingers. She caught it before it hit the floor. She stood there, crouched over it, heart slamming against her ribs, the pieces assembling themselves in her mind with a horrible, elegant precision. The rejection, the exile, the timing of it, Celeste appearing at exactly the right moment, the soldiers at the city gates. He knew, Miranda said. Not a question. The words tasted like ash. Ezra knew what I was. Sister Etta's silence was the most devastating answer she had ever received. The rejection had not been weakness. It had not been Celeste's beauty or her family's politics or some failure of Miranda's own. It had been strategy. She had been removed because she was dangerous. Miranda stood up slowly. She set the portrait down on the table with both hands very gently, like she was laying something to rest. Then she stood in the low candlelight of that underground room, in her plain brown dress with her ruined hair and her mud-rough hands and the child of an Alpha King growing in her belly, and she felt something settle into her bones like iron being poured into a mold. This was not grief anymore. This was not heartbreak. This was something that had a direction. Tell me everything, she said. And outside, at the top of the hill, in the black stone castle with its midnight banners and its 4 cold towers, a door opened, and the king's steward stepped out with a message in his hand and fear in his eyes, because someone had just told the king that the Ashenmoor heir had walked through the city gates last night on a tired horse, alone and unguarded and wearing a wool dress. And the king had laughed. He should not have laughed. Sister Etta talked for 2 hours. Miranda sat across from her at the small oak table, hands flat on the surface, perfectly still, and she listened to the entire architecture of her life being dismantled and rebuilt into something she barely recognized. Her grandmother, Alpha Queen Seraphine of Ashenmoor, had ruled for 19 years before the council moved against her. She had been the last of the Ashenmoor royal bloodline, a line that predated every pack alliance in the known territory by 300 years. The Ashenmoor Alphas were not merely powerful. They were, according to every record Sister Etta had spent decades quietly collecting and hiding, something older than the current hierarchy entirely. Something the other packs had spent generations trying to breed out of existence. They called it the Ash Gift. Miranda had never heard of it. She was about to wish she still hadn't. It manifests differently in each carrier, Sister Etta said, folding her hands on the table with the calm of a woman delivering news she has rehearsed. In your grandmother it was command, not the alpha voice, not the dominance hierarchy. Something above that. Something that worked on wolves and humans alike, and could not be resisted or overridden. And in my mother? Miranda asked. Sight, Sister Etta said simply. She could see the bond between wolves. See when it had been tampered with. See when an alpha had used his authority to suppress or redirect a mate bond artificially. Something slow and cold moved through Miranda's chest. Artificially, she repeated. Sister Etta met her eyes. A powerful enough alpha, with the right knowledge and the right external pressure, can suppress the natural mate bond. Not sever it, that requires the formal rejection. But delay it. Redirect the instinct. Make a wolf believe for a period of time that they feel something for someone they ordinarily wouldn't. The candles in the room felt very loud suddenly. The way flames are loud when everything else goes silent. Miranda thought about Celeste. About how quickly everything had moved. About the way Ezra's eyes had gone to her sister like something magnetic, something that had arrived fully formed and immediate, not like attraction but like certainty. She had always found that certainty strange. Had filed it away under things she didn't want to examine because the examination would hurt. His uncle, Miranda said. Dorian did something to him. Sister Etta said nothing, which was confirmation enough. He manipulated the bond, Miranda said. Her voice was very flat. He found a way to redirect Ezra's instinct toward Celeste. Away from me. Your mother's ability would have exposed it immediately, Sister Etta said quietly. Which is why, when Dorian found out about what you were, he moved against you through Ezra rather than directly. He used the rejection as a weapon. Exile you cleanly without scandal, without giving you a reason to investigate. Just an Omega rejected by her Alpha. Too humiliated to look closely at why. Miranda pressed her hands together until the knuckles went white. She was cataloging it all. Filing every piece of it away with the cold precision she had developed over 11 days of hard travel, and a lifetime of being underestimated. What is the gift in me? She asked. Sister Etta looked at her for a long moment. We don't know yet, she said. In some bloodlines it doesn't emerge until a moment of extreme crisis. A pause. Or extreme anger. I've been angry for 11 days, Miranda said. Not angry enough, Sister Etta said. Not the right kind. What triggers the gift is not ordinary anger. She held Miranda's gaze. It is the moment a woman with Ashenmoor blood decides, completely and without reservation, that she will take back what was taken from her. The silence in the room changed. Became something textured, something weighted like the air before a lightning strike. Miranda said nothing. But something in her eyes shifted, and Sister Etta, who had been watching women with Ashenmoor blood her entire life, recognized it immediately. She sat back slightly. Just slightly. Like a person giving a fire more room. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and they both went still. Footsteps. One person. Light, controlled practice, the footsteps of someone who had learned long ago to move without announcing themselves. Miranda had her blade out before the door at the bottom of the stairs opened. The man who stepped through it stopped immediately when he saw the blade. He raised both hands slowly, and Miranda looked at him and catalogued. Young, perhaps 24, dark skin, tall and lean beneath a plain black traveling cloak. The kind of face that was handsome in a sharp, angular way and knew it but had decided that wasn't the most useful thing about it. His eyes went from the blade to her face to her stomach and back to her face, and to his credit, his expression barely moved. Sister Etta, he said, without looking away from Miranda. You could have told her I was coming. I could have, Sister Etta agreed placidly. Miranda, this is Rowan. He is one of the king's personal guard. Miranda did not lower the blade. That is not a recommendation. I know, the man Rowan said. He was still calm. I've been passing information to Sister Etta for 8 months. I'm the one who told her you were coming. I'm also the one who has been keeping Dorian's search parties moving in the wrong direction for the past 3 weeks. Why? He studied her for a moment. Because I knew your mother. Before Ironvale, before everything. I was 14 and she was the kindest person I had ever met. And she died because nobody protected her adequately. And I intend to not repeat that failure. A pause. Also because Dorian is a tyrant who has been bleeding this kingdom dry for 18 years. And I am extremely tired of standing behind him at banquets. Miranda held the blade steady for another 3 seconds. Then she put it away. Talk, she said. He did. Rowan had been inside Ashenmoor Castle for 4 years. He knew its rhythms, its corridors, its dungeons and its secrets with the intimate knowledge of a man who had spent years being overlooked. The king was hosting a winter court gathering in 10 days. Lords and ladies from 8 allied territories, a 3-day event of feasting and political maneuvering. He was using it, Rowan said, to consolidate his hold on the eastern territories, whose lords had begun to murmur about the legitimacy of his claim to the Ashenmoor throne, because Dorian Voss had never had a legitimate claim. He had taken the throne by force, by lies, and by the systematic elimination of anyone who could prove the Ashenmoor bloodline still existed. He had failed at that last part. The lords don't love him, Rowan said. They fear him. There's a difference. And fear is a foundation you can undermine. He looked at Miranda directly. If the true heir appeared at the Winter Court, if she could prove her bloodline publicly, in front of all 8 lords and their retinues, Dorian's claim collapses. He has no legal ground to stand on, no alliance strong enough to compensate for that level of public exposure. She would need to appear as the heir, Sister Etta said. Not as a refugee. Not as a fugitive. She would need to walk into that hall looking like what she is. I have one ruined silk gown and a wool dress, Miranda said. That, Sister Etta said, with the first suggestion of a smile Miranda had seen from her, is solvable. She'd also need a reason to be there that doesn't immediately signal to Dorian what she is, Rowan said. A cover, at least for the first night. Miranda looked at him. What did you have in mind? The lords are each permitted to bring their retinues. Staff, advisors, attendants. He paused. One of the lords, Cassius of Thornfield, owes me a debt he would rather not have called in publicly. He will add you to his retinue as a lady's companion to his wife. You enter the castle as nobody. You learn the room. And when the moment is right. I stop being nobody, Miranda said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. 10 days. She was nearly 6 months along, though she carried small. Her wolf metabolism keeping her stronger than a human woman would have been, the baby tucked close. She could move. She could think. She could walk into a room full of lords and predators and hold herself together. She had been doing that her entire life. There's something else, Rowan said. His voice had changed. Slightly. Just enough that Miranda's attention sharpened. Ezra Voss, he said. He arrived in Ashenmoor 2 days ago. The name hit her the same way it always did. Like a stone thrown against a window she thought she'd shuddered. Why? Officially, Ironvale Pack has been invited to the Winter Court. Dorian has been courting an alliance with them for 2 years. Rowan held her gaze. Unofficially, from what I can gather, something has changed at Ironvale in the past weeks. Ezra has been asking questions. About you. About your exile. About his uncle's role in his pack's politics. A pause. I don't know how much he knows yet. But something has shifted in him. He's too late, Miranda said immediately. Perhaps, Rowan said. But a man with an alpha's power asking the right questions in the right rooms could be useful to you. Or he could be the most dangerous person in that castle, if he decides his uncle's interests and his own are aligned. Miranda stood up from the table. She moved to the small window set high in the stone wall, ground level outside, waist height in this underground room, and looked out at the cobblestones and the boots of people passing and the thin strip of gray sky above. She thought about Ezra arriving at the castle his uncle controlled. She thought about him asking questions. She thought about what it would feel like to see his face. And she pressed that thought flat like she was pressing a flame under her palm, quick and without mercy. She felt the baby move. She pressed her hand to her stomach. He rejected me, she said. Quiet. Absolute. He exiled me. He stood in front of me and he unmade our bond and he sent me away carrying his child and he said nothing. He felt nothing. And whatever he is feeling now, whatever questions he is asking, they are 8 months too late. Nobody in the room argued with that. I'm going into that castle, Miranda said, turning back around. Not for Ezra. Not to make him feel something. Not to give him a chance to explain or apologize or ask for something I have no intention of giving him. She met Rowan's eyes, then Sister Etta's. I'm going in to take what's mine. The throne. The bloodline. The future my mother died protecting. She straightened to her full height. And Sister Etta, who had knelt before Alpha Queen Seraphine of Ashenmoor 40 years ago in a room very much like this one, felt something move through her that she had not felt in a very long time. She stood up. And before Miranda could speak, she lowered herself, slowly and deliberately, onto one knee. Your Grace, she said. Rowan looked at the old woman. Looked at Miranda. Then he went down on one knee as well without a word, like it was the most natural thing he had done in years. Miranda looked at them both. At the candlelight. At the portrait of her grandmother still lying on the table. She thought about a girl who had walked out of a castle in a ruined green gown with mud on her boots and 40 coins, and a fury she didn't know what to do with. She thought about what that girl had become. "Get up," she said. "Both of you. We have 10 days, and I need to learn everything about that castle before I walk into it." She paused. "And someone find me a gown." The gown was midnight black. Not the modest, forgettable black of a lady's companion. Not the practical black of a woman trying to disappear. It was the black of deep water and moonless skies and decisions that cannot be undone. Silk so fine it moved like liquid when she walked, with silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs that caught candlelight and threw it back like sparks. Sister Etta had produced it from somewhere Miranda didn't ask about, along with a silver ribbon for her hair, and a pair of slippers that actually fit. Miranda had stood in front of the small cracked mirror in her room and looked at herself for a long time. She didn't look like a refugee. She didn't look like an Omega from a minor pack with mud on her boots and grief in her chest. She looked like something that had been through fire and come out the other side with better posture. She looked, she thought, distantly like her grandmother. She pressed one hand to her stomach, rounded now, unmistakable, the baby carried high and close, and she thought about the 10 days she had spent in that underground room with Sister Etta and Rowan, learning the castle's layout from Rowan's careful charcoal drawings, learning the names and loyalties of every lord who would be present, learning the legal language of bloodline claims, the specific words required to invoke ancestral right before a gathered court, the points of law that Dorian could not argue against if she delivered them correctly. She had not slept more than 4 hours on any of those 10 nights. She had never felt more awake in her life. Rowan had been right about Lord Cassius of Thornfield. The man had gone pale when Rowan presented his debt, and had gone paler still when he understood what was being asked of him, and had spent approximately 40 seconds weighing his options before agreeing with the speed of a man who knew which way the wind was turning. His wife, Lady Petra, a small, observant woman with clever eyes and the self-possession of someone who had survived 20 years of court politics, had taken one look at Miranda and said nothing except, "You'll walk 2 steps behind me until I tell you otherwise. And whatever you are planning, you will not do it before the second night. The first night you observe." Miranda had agreed. Lady Petra reminded her, unsettlingly, of herself in 20 years. Lord Cassius's carriage rolled through the castle gates on a grey afternoon with thin snow beginning to fall, and Miranda sat inside it with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes moving over every detail she could see through the carriage window. The guard rotations, the placement of the torches, the distance between the main gate and the great hall entrance, the servants moving between buildings with their heads down against the cold. The castle was enormous up close, even larger than it had looked from the city below. The black stone of the walls caught the flat winter light, and held it in a way that made the whole structure look like it was absorbing the day rather than reflecting it. The 4 towers rose into the low clouds. The banners snapped and shuddered in the wind. Miranda thought, briefly and without sentiment, that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, because it was hers. They were met in the inner courtyard by the king's steward, a thin, anxious man who moved like someone perpetually braced for criticism, and processed through the formal receiving line with the rest of Lord Cassius's party. Miranda kept her eyes down, kept her breathing even, moved with the unhurried quietness of a woman who belonged in the background of a room. She did not look at the king when they passed before him. She felt his eyes on her. A brief, assessing sweep, the kind of look powerful men gave to women they considered furniture, and then he moved on to Lord Cassius and the political niceties that were the real business of the moment. Dorian Voss was older than she had imagined. Perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and Ezra's jaw and none of Ezra's depth. The same strong lines arranged into something colder, something that had made its peace with cruelty a long time ago and stopped noticing the cost. He smiled at Lord Cassius with the warmth of a man performing warmth, and Miranda filed away everything she observed and followed Lady Petra into the castle without a backward glance. The great hall was already full when the evening feast began. Torches in iron brackets running the length of the walls. Long tables draped in midnight blue cloth. The smell of wood smoke and roasted meat and expensive perfume, and beneath all of it, under everything, the layered musk of wolves, alphas and betas and omegas from 8 different packs and territories, all performing civility at the king's table while their instincts mapped the room's hierarchy with animal precision. Miranda sat at the far end of the lower table, 3 seats down from Lady Petra, and she ate slowly and watched everything. She was watching the dais when he walked in. She had prepared for this. She had spent 10 days preparing for exactly this moment. The moment she would be in the same room as Ezra Voss for the first time since she had walked out of his study in a ruined green gown. She had rehearsed her own stillness. Had told herself, with the ruthless practicality she had developed like a muscle over the past months, that he was irrelevant. That he was a variable to be managed. That whatever she had felt for him was a wound that had closed over. And whatever lived in its place was something she controlled absolutely. She had been very convincing. Until he walked through the door. He was in formal dress, dark coat, silver insignia of the Iron Veil pack at his collar, the bearing of a man who filled whatever room he stood in without trying. He had a shadow around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a hollowness that she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror for months. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping. Good. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to confirm that her body still knew him. Her pulse climbing, the ghost of the severed bond pulling at the empty place in her chest like a tide responding to the moon, involuntary and infuriating. Then she looked away. She picked up her goblet. She took a measured sip. She turned her attention to the conversation on her left, where one of Lord Cassius's advisors was describing a border dispute with the tedium of a man who loved his own voice, and she listened to him with every appearance of genuine interest. She did not see the moment Ezra's eyes found her, but she felt it. The whole room seemed to contract around it. A shift in pressure, something enormous and invisible, like the air before a storm decides which direction to break. She felt his gaze land on her the way you feel heat from a fire when your back is turned. Not seeing it, just knowing undeniably that it was there. She did not turn around. Across the hall, at the head table, Ezra Voss had stopped moving. His hand was on the back of his chair. He was supposed to be sitting. He was not sitting. He was standing completely still, staring at the far end of the lower table, and the man beside him, his beta, a broad-shouldered wolf named Garrett, had leaned in and said something that Ezra clearly did not hear. Because something was happening to him that he did not have words for yet. The bond was alive. Not the ghost of it. Not the memory of it. It was alive. Roaring back with a violence that moved through him like a physical blow. Like a wall of water hitting a man who thought he was standing on dry land. Every severed thread of it was knitting itself back together at speed. And the pain of that reunion was extraordinary. Not grief, not loss, but the specific agony of a wound reopening that had been sutured shut wrong. His wolf knew her. His wolf had always known her. And his wolf was done pretending otherwise. He found her by instinct. Dark hair, silver ribbon, midnight gown. Sitting at the lower table with the composure of a woman who had decided the room was hers before she walked into it. He could see her profile from where he stood. The line of her jaw, the straight set of her shoulders, and he could see with a clarity that knocked the breath out of him completely. He could see she was with child. His child. The goblet in his hand cracked. Not dropped. Not set down. The stem snapped between his fingers with a clean, decisive sound, and wine spilled across the white cloth of the head table, and 3 people turned to look at him, and Ezra did not notice any of it. Garrett's hand was on his arm. Ezra. Low and urgent. Ezra, you need to sit down. She's here, Ezra said. His voice came out strange. Wrecked. Like the word had been dragged up from somewhere deep. I see her, Garrett said. Sit. Down. Not here. Not like this. Ezra sat. Mechanically. His eyes never left her. And Miranda, who felt the bond pulling at her chest like a hand trying to turn her face, lifted her goblet and smiled at something the advisor on her left had said, smooth and unhurried, and did not look at the head table once. Rowan, standing in his position against the far wall with the rest of the King's Guard, caught her eye across the room. She gave him the smallest nod. On schedule. But what neither Miranda nor Rowan saw, what no one in the room saw except the man with iron-gray hair and cold eyes at the center of the dais, was the king setting down his own goblet very carefully, and turning to whisper something to the guard at his right shoulder. The guard nodded and slipped out through the side door. Dorian Voss had not lived this long by being slow to recognize a threat. He had recognized Miranda Ashford the moment she walked through his door. He had been waiting for her after all. Miranda had mapped 3 routes from the Great Hall to her assigned chamber. This was not caution. This was not fear. It was the same methodical preparation she had applied to everything for the past 10 days. The same precision she used when learning the castle's guard rotations, the servants' schedules, the distance in seconds between the dais and the side door. Miranda had stopped doing anything by accident. She chose the eastern corridor. Longer but quieter, running behind the kitchens, the kind of route that staff used and lords didn't, where she could move without performing anything for anyone. She had been walking for perhaps 90 seconds when she heard him behind her. She knew his footsteps. She had not thought about that until this moment, had not considered that she had accumulated him so completely, in the year before the rejection, that she could identify the specific weight and rhythm of him in the dark. It was an intimacy she hadn't consented to keeping. Her body had simply held on to it without her permission. She did not slow down. Miranda. His voice. Low, careful, the way a person speaks to a flame they're not certain they should be this close to. She had forgotten, she had worked very hard at forgetting, the particular quality of her name in his mouth, like it meant something, like it had always meant something. She kept walking. Miranda, please. The please was what stopped her. Not because it softened her. Not because it moved her in the direction of forgiveness or opening or any of the things she had sealed shut over 8 months of sleeping rough, and carrying his child and learning how to rebuild herself from the material of her own fury. It stopped her because she recognized it. She knew the sound of Ezra Voss asking for something he wasn't certain he deserved, and the recognition of it was its own particular cruelty, a reminder that she had once found that uncertainty in him tender, had once loved that he knew his own edges. She turned around. He looked worse up close. The hollowness she had clocked from across the hall was more pronounced here, in the narrow corridor with its single torch throwing uneven light. He had the look of a man who had been doing sustained battle with something inside himself and had not been winning. His jaw was tight. His eyes, those eyes she had spent a year learning the precise shade of, were fixed on her face with an intensity that she recognized as a man trying to hold himself together through concentration alone. He stopped when she turned, kept a careful distance, like he understood instinctively that the space between them was not his to close. His gaze dropped, briefly and involuntarily, to her stomach. The muscle in his jaw moved. "You're safe," he said. The words came out rough, like they had been waiting a long time. I've been trying to find out where you were for months. If you were eating, if you had shelter, if I had survived the exile you sentenced me to," Miranda said. Her voice was even. Conversational, almost. The evenness of it seemed to hurt him more than volume would have. "Yes," he said. He didn't flinch from it. She noted that. "Yes. That. I survived," she said. "As you can see." "Miranda. I don't have a great deal of time," she said. "So I'd ask you to be concise." Something moved across his face. Grief or the shape of it. "I know what my uncle did," he said. "I know about the bond, what he did to it, what he redirected. I've spent 3 months pulling at every thread of it, and I know now that what I felt for Celeste wasn't." He stopped. Started again. "It wasn't real. It was constructed. He found someone who knew the old ways of manipulating mate bonds and he used it on me, and I know that doesn't absolve you," Miranda said. "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." She looked at him for a moment. The torch beside them hissed in a draft from somewhere, and his shadow moved, and she thought about all the versions of this conversation she had imagined in the dark on cold nights when her defenses were lowest. She had rehearsed this. She had armored herself for exactly this. His face, his voice, the genuine wreckage of him, the fact that he had clearly been suffering and that some sleeping, inconvenient part of her had always been built to care about that. She had known the armor would need to be very good. It was. "The manipulation explains the feeling," she said. "It does not explain the choice. You looked at me in that study and you made a decision. You chose the feeling over the evidence, over the years, over what was in front of you. Whatever your uncle did to the bond, you still chose to use it as a reason. You still picked up the rejection like a weapon." A pause. "And you still let me go." He closed his eyes. "I know," he said. Came out stripped of everything. Just the 2 words, undefended. "I believe you know," Miranda said. "I believe you have been suffering considerably. I believe you are standing in this corridor because something in you is trying to do the right thing, whatever you think that looks like. She held his gaze steadily. It doesn't matter. He opened his eyes. It doesn't. Ezra. She said his name the way you close a door. Firmly. Completely. I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it completely so that we don't have to revisit it. She let him hold her gaze so he would know she meant every syllable. I have not spent 8 months surviving in order to give you the chance to fix this. He stared at her. The bond is back, he said. His voice had cracked slightly on it. I can feel it. I know you can feel it too. I know you felt it the moment I walked into that hall. Yes, she said simply. Then. I feel it, she said. And I don't care. 5 words. She watched them land. She watched the precise moment they hit him. The way a man looks when something structural gives way, when the thing he has been building his hope on reveals itself as insufficient foundation. It was not dramatic. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood there while something went out of his face, and she held her ground and did not let herself feel it, did not permit herself the luxury of responding to the responding. You don't, he stopped. Tried again. You don't mean that. I know that's very difficult to believe, she said. I understand that it is easier to assume I'm lying or protecting myself, or that the bond will eventually override what I actually want. I understand that a man who has recently rediscovered the truth of a mate bond would find it inconceivable that his mate could simply choose not to act on it. She adjusted the shawl at her shoulders with the unhurried calm of a woman who had somewhere to be. But you rejected me, Ezra. You exiled me. And I learned something useful in the months that followed. I am not required to want what I was born to want. I get to decide what I do with it. The corridor was very quiet. The baby, he said. Low and raw. Miranda, the baby is mine. Yes. Then you can't just. I can, she said. I have. And I will continue to. She looked at him, and there was no cruelty in it. That was perhaps the most devastating part. There was no hatred, no desire to wound, no residue of the love she had once had curdled into something dark. She simply looked at him with the clear, measuring eyes of a woman who had made her decisions and made her peace with them. I'm not asking you to be absent. The child will know its father. I'm not interested in punishing the baby for what you did. A pause. But I need you to understand that your child's mother is not someone who belongs to you. She is not waiting for you. She is not going to be moved by your suffering or your guilt or the bond pulling at both of us in the dark. Ezra was silent. He looked like a man who had walked into something he couldn't find the edges of. Then why are you here? He asked. In this castle. In my uncle's castle, dressed like. He stopped. And she watched him look at her. Really look at her, past the grief and the guilt and the rawness of the bond. And she watched the question shift behind his eyes as he began to put pieces together that he hadn't yet assembled. Miranda, why are you here? She considered him for one moment. He was asking questions, Rowan had said. He had been pulling at threads. He had come here, she suspected, not entirely because of the Winter Court and Ironvale's alliance and Dorian's politics. He had come here because he was following the same thread she had followed, moving toward the same truth from a different direction. She could send him away. She could tell him nothing. She had Rowan and she had Lady Petra and she had 10 days of preparation and a bloodline that could bring down a king. And she did not need Ezra Voss for any of it. She knew that. And yet, tell me what you know, she said. About your uncle. About what he did to the throne. About all of it. Everything you found in the past 3 months. He stared at her. Why? Because I am deciding whether you are a resource or a liability, she said evenly. And the answer will determine whether I tell you anything in return. She met his eyes. This is not reconciliation. This is not an opening. If you walk down this corridor with me, it is as someone who is useful to a specific purpose, and the moment you stop being useful or start being in the way, I will tell you so directly. A long, complicated silence. Then Ezra Voss, Alpha of Ironvale, a man who had never in his life been told he was permitted to be useful and nothing more, looked at the woman carrying his child in the corridor of his uncle's castle. All right, he said quietly. All right. I'll take what you're offering. His voice was stripped of pride. Not defeated, that wasn't the word. Deliberate. like a man choosing to set something heavy down because he has finally understood that holding it was never going to serve. If this is what I can give you right now, information, my presence, whatever use I am, then I'll give it. Without conditions. Miranda looked at him for a moment that stretched long enough to count. She turned and began walking. My grandmother was Alpha Queen Seraphine of Ashenmoor, she said, as he fell into step beside her. Not close. A careful, respectful distance. And your uncle murdered her counsel, fabricated a claim, and took her throne 18 years ago. The silence that followed had the quality of a man's entire understanding of his own life rearranging itself. And you, Ezra said slowly. You are. In 2 days, Miranda said. There will be 8 lords in the Great Hall, and I am going to make sure they all know exactly who I am. She did not look at him, but she heard his breathing change beside her in the dark. Heard the precise moment everything he thought he knew about the woman he had exiled, the woman he had catastrophically underestimated, collapsed into something new and vast and entirely beyond what he had prepared himself for. God, he said softly. Not quite, Miranda said. Just an air. From the far end of the corridor, unseen in the shadow of a doorway, a guard with the king's insignia on his collar watched them walk away together. He noted the direction. He noted the conversation or what he could hear of it. And he turned and went back through the door, moving quickly now, toward the part of the castle where the king's private rooms were lit with firelight at this hour, and where Dorian Voss was waiting to hear whether his instinct, that the woman who had walked through his gate today was precisely the threat he had spent 18 years trying to prevent, was correct. It was. The second day passed like a held breath. Miranda moved through it as instructed, 2 steps behind Lady Petra, quiet, observant, a woman-shaped piece of furniture in a castle full of people performing importance at each other. She attended the morning's formal reception and said nothing. She stood in the gallery above the afternoon's hunting discussion and memorized faces. She ate in the servants' hall at midday and listened to the talk of the lower staff with the focused attention of someone who understood that the most useful information in any castle lives in its walls, and its kitchens and the mouths of people who have been trained to believe they are invisible. She learned 3 things. The first, that 2 of the 8 lords, Fenwick of Caldermere and Aldous of the Reach, had been quietly in contact with each other for months about the question of Dorian's legitimacy. They had not yet committed to anything. They were watching. Men like that were not idealists. They were investors waiting to determine which side of a bet would pay. The second, that Dorian had increased the guard rotation in the East Wing overnight. Rowan had confirmed it. The king was moving pieces, tightening his grip on the castle's interior, closing routes that had been open before. He had not announced anything. He had not moved against her directly. He was, Miranda understood, a patient man. He had been waiting 18 years for the Ashenmoor bloodline to surface. He could wait 1 more night. The third, that there was a woman in the castle who had known her mother. She was a seamstress, 60, gray-braided, with a kind of face that had been beautiful a long time ago and had settled into something more interesting. Miranda had found her by accident, in the corridor outside the linen room, when the woman had stopped and stared at her with an expression of naked shock and then, collecting herself, had said in a voice barely above breath, "You have her eyes," and Miranda had taken her by the elbow and walked her somewhere private without a word. The woman's name was Bly. She had served the castle under Seraphine's reign and had survived the transition by being invisible. Small, useful, unthreatening. The kind of person a king doesn't bother eliminating because he doesn't see her. She had been here for 18 years. She knew where every body was buried. She knew in particular that Dorian kept the original royal charter, the document that established the Ashenmoor bloodline's right to the throne in perpetuity, predating every alliance and every competing claim, locked in a chest in his private study. He keeps it because destroying it would be its own kind of evidence, Bly said. He needs to be able to produce it if ever pressed, and argue his own interpretation of it. But it exists. The original with Seraphine's seal. Miranda had looked at the old woman. Can you get to the study? Bly had looked back at her with the calm of someone who has spent 18 years quietly hating a king and waiting for a reason to act. I've been cleaning that room for 18 years, she said. He stopped seeing me a long time ago. Miranda had pressed her hand. She had not said be careful because careful was the woman's entire existence, and she didn't need to be told. She had said, "Thank you," and meant it with everything she had. That was the afternoon. By the time the second evening's feast began, Miranda had 3 allies in this castle who knew exactly who she was, a 4th who suspected it and had decided to bet on her, a document potentially en route to her hands, and a plan that depended on timing as precise as anything she had ever attempted. She dressed alone. The midnight gown again. There was only the one, and she wore it like armor. Her hair up, a few dark strands loose at her jaw. The silver at her collar. She looked at herself in the mirror for less time than the night before, because she had already made her peace with what she was doing and prolonged reflection served nothing. Her hand went to her stomach. "I know," she said quietly. To the baby. To herself. To whoever might be listening in the spaces between things. "I know." She straightened. She walked out. The great hall was fuller than the first night. The formality had relaxed slightly. The second night of a winter court always did. When the initial posturing had settled and people began to feel the loosening that good wine and warm fires and the social permission of a feast produced. The lords were louder. The musicians in the gallery above played something more lively. The candles had burned lower and the light was warmer and more forgiving, and the whole room had the quality of a fire that has been built up well, pleasant, radiant, and absolutely capable of burning everything in its path. Miranda took her seat at the lower table. Lady Petra, 2 seats to her right, did not look at her. But she pressed her index finger against the table's edge once. A gesture so small it could have been nothing. A prearranged signal. "The lords are watching. Ready when you are." Miranda poured her wine. She ate. She smiled at the appropriate moments. She was nobody. She watched the high table without appearing to. Dorian Voss sat at its center with the ease of a man who had inhabited power so long he had stopped feeling its weight. He was in conversation with Lord Aldous of the Reach, performing the particular kind of attentiveness that powerful men deploy when they need something from someone they consider beneath them. His eyes moved through the room with a regularity that looked casual and wasn't. She had clocked it last night and again tonight, the sweep, the return, the assessment. He was monitoring. Every 4th sweep. His gaze passed over the lower table. Every 4th sweep, it moved past her in the way that it passed past every other unremarkable face, without pause, without recognition. He was performing not knowing her with the same precision she was performing being nobody. She understood with a cold clarity that this had always been the real contest. Not dominance. Not force. The question of who could hold the performance longer. Ezra was 3 seats down from his uncle. She had avoided looking at him directly since the corridor. She could feel him without looking, the bond like a compass needle she had learned to ignore. But she was aware of him with the peripheral precision of someone trained not to be obvious. He was watching her. Not constantly. Not openly. But with the focused attention of a man who has been told, he is a resource and has decided to take the assignment seriously. He was watching the room, watching the king, watching the guards, watching her with quick sidelong assessments and then moving his eyes away. He had not tried to speak to her again. She had told Rowan in a brief exchange at the corridor outside the kitchens that morning, what Ezra now knew and what she had agreed to. Rowan had gone still for a moment, then nodded with the expression of a man revising a calculation. "Can you trust him?" "I don't know yet," she had said honestly. But a man with alpha authority standing publicly at the right moment carries weight none of us can replicate. If he chooses the right side. And if he chooses wrong? She had thought of his face in the corridor. The stripped, deliberate quality of "I'll take what you're offering." "Then we proceed without him," she had said. "The plan doesn't require Ezra. It just becomes harder." Rowan had accepted this. He was good at accepting contingencies. The feast moved through its courses. Courses she didn't taste. The musicians changed their tempo. Somewhere above the hall, in a passage that ran between the gallery and the east wing, Bly was either retrieving the document or she wasn't. Miranda set down her goblet. Breathed once. Stood up. Lady Petra, without turning, went very still. Miranda crossed the great hall. She moved through it the way she had moved through it for 2 days, unhurried, quiet. The walk of someone going from one unremarkable place to another. 3 lords' gazes passed across her and found nothing to fix on. A servant moved aside to let her pass. She navigated between tables, between conversations, between the beautiful and different machinery of a royal feast in full motion. And then she stepped up onto the dais. The first person to notice was Lord Fenwick of Caldermere. He had been reaching for his wine and he stopped, hand outstretched, watching her with the sudden sharp attention of a man who has seen something that doesn't fit the pattern. The second was the steward, who opened his mouth. The third was Ezra, who had seen her stand and had been watching her cross the room with the controlled tension of a man who has been told to wait, and is waiting on the extreme edge of that instruction. Miranda walked to the center of the dais. She did not ask for attention. She did not announce herself. She simply stood at the center of the king's dais in a room full of wolves, and she straightened to her full height, and something happened in the room that had nothing to do with volume or gesture. A shift, a realignment, the way a room changes when someone enters it who was built for exactly that room. The conversation died in rings around her. The musicians faltered. The lords turned. Dorian Voss turned last. He looked at her and she looked at him, and for one moment the performance they had both been maintaining dropped away completely, and they simply looked at each other. The king who had taken a throne that wasn't his and the woman who had come to take it back, with the clear, unadorned recognition of two people who have known this moment was coming. "My name," Miranda said into the perfect silence, "is Miranda Ashenmoor." The name hit the room like a stone hitting water. She watched it ripple outward. The lords, the retinues, the servants along the walls, watched the ones who knew their history go rigid and the ones who didn't understand yet turn to the ones who did. "I am the granddaughter of Alpha Queen Seraphine of Ashenmoor. I am the daughter of Lyra Ashenmoor, who was murdered 18 years ago by the man currently sitting on a throne built from her blood." She kept her voice even, caring. The voice of a woman who had spent 10 days learning exactly what words to use and in what order. "I am invoking ancestral right before this assembled court. I am challenging the legitimacy of Dorian Voss's claim to the Ashenmoor throne on the grounds of falsified succession, the illegal suppression of the royal bloodline, and the murder of its last recognized Alpha Queen." Not a sound in the room. Not a breath. Then Dorian Voss stood up. He did it slowly, with the unhurried deliberation of a man who has already decided how this ends. And Miranda watched him stand, and she watched the expression on his face, and something in her went very, very still. He was not surprised. He was not rattled. He was not afraid. He looked, with a cold and absolute certainty, like a man playing out a hand he dealt himself. "Guards," he said. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. Not from the doors. From within, from positions along the walls, from the gallery above, from behind the tapestries at the dais's edges, places that spoke of deliberate prepositioning, of a man who had spent the past 24 hours setting an architecture of response around this exact moment. 6 guards in the king's colors, moving with the coordination of soldiers who have been given clear instructions. Miranda did not move. "Remove her," Dorian said. "Take her to the lower cells. She is a fugitive of Ironvale Pack, operating under a lawful exile." "She is operating under no such thing," said a voice. Everyone turned. Ezra was standing. He had pushed back from the head table and he was on his feet at the edge of the dais, and his face had the quality of a man who has spent 3 months pulling at threads and has finally, in this precise moment, decided what to do with what he found at the end of them. He was not looking at Miranda. He was looking at his uncle. "The exile was invalid," he said. His voice was the alpha voice, not the performed theatrical version that men use to intimidate, but the deep foundational register of it, the one that came from something true. "It was issued under duress, in response to a manipulated bond that I now understand you constructed deliberately." He moved to stand between the advancing guards and Miranda without appearing to hurry. "An exile issued under manipulation is not lawful. You know this. Every lord in this room knows this." "Ezra," Dorian said. The name came out like a warning and like a question and like a man recalculating at speed. "Think carefully." "I've been thinking carefully for 3 months," Ezra said. "I'm done." The guards stopped. Not because Ezra had ordered them. He had no authority over the king's men. They stopped because 6 wolves from 6 different packs are still wolves. And the alpha voice at its fullest register does something to the hindbrain that conscious loyalty cannot entirely override. They stopped and they looked at each other and the moment stretched. "My Lord Fenwick," Miranda said into the pause without taking her eyes off Dorian. "My Lord Aldous." You came to this court because you have questions about the legitimacy of this king's claim. You have been asking those questions quietly for months because you did not yet have sufficient reason to ask them loudly. She turned, deliberately, and looked at the two lords she had identified. I am giving you that reason. Ancestral right has been invoked before a gathered court. That invocation requires a response. It cannot be imprisoned or exiled or removed. It requires a legal adjudication, here tonight, in front of every witness in this room. Fenwick of Caldermere was on his feet. Aldous of the Reach a beat later followed. The lady is correct, Fenwick said. His voice was careful, deliberate, the voice of a man who has made his calculation and committed to it. Ancestral right, once invoked before a witnessed assembly, cannot be dismissed by the authority being challenged. That is older than any of our alliances, my king. That is older than this court. She has no proof of bloodline, Dorian said. The temperature in his voice had dropped to something that would have silenced a lesser room. I do, said a voice from the hall's edge. Bly walked forward from the servant's door. She was 60 years old and gray-braided, and she had survived 18 years in this castle by being invisible. And she walked through the great hall of Ashenmoor with her head level and something in her carriage that the room recognized before it recognized her face. The walk of a woman who has been waiting a very long time to stop being afraid. In her hands was a document, heavy with age, sealed in dark wax with an impression that several of the older lords recognized immediately. The Ashenmoor royal seal. The original charter of succession, Bly said, placing it on the table before Lord Fenwick with the care of someone handling something sacred. Signed by Alpha Queen Seraphine. Sealed with the royal seal. Predating every claim this man has ever made to this throne. She looked at the king. I have been cleaning your study for 18 years, my lord. You stopped seeing me a long time ago. Dorian's hand moved. Miranda saw it. The small, deliberate reach toward the guard at his right shoulder. The gesture of a man who has decided that public legitimacy is a game he has already lost, and it is time to play a different game entirely. The guard's hand went to his sword. Don't, Ezra said. One word. The alpha voice at its most absolute. A sound like a door slamming shut. The guard's hand stopped. Dorian Voss looked at his nephew. The look of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew about the piece. He had spent 20 years moving around his board. Everything you have, he said quietly. Everything Ironvale is, everything you inherited, I gave you that. I built it. I cleared the way for it. I know, Ezra said. I know exactly what you cleared out of the way to build it. He turned his back on his uncle. He turned to Miranda. She was watching him with those clear, measuring eyes, the eyes that gave nothing away, that assessed and weighed and did not offer what was not earned. He held her gaze and he said nothing because there was nothing he could say in this room in front of these people that would mean anything. He had made his choice. He had made it standing up in front of 8 lords and a king and every witness in the hall, and it was the only thing he had to offer her that she hadn't already taken for herself. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the room. My lords, she said. The charter is before you. The invocation stands. I am calling for adjudication of this claim tonight, by the assembled witnesses of this court, as is my right under laws older than any of us. She stood on the dais of her grandmother's castle with her grandmother's name and her grandmother's bearing and the next generation of the Ashenmoor bloodline carried close, and she looked at Dorian Voss with the complete, clear eyes of a woman who had crossed mountains and marshes in 8 months of surviving the unsurvivable to stand in this exact spot. You had 18 years, she said to him. And now you are done. The adjudication moved the way all verdicts do, not as a single door swinging open, but as a series of smaller ones, each closing behind you until the destination becomes the only remaining direction. Fenwick broke the royal seal. He did it with the deliberate, witness formality of a man who understood that every gesture he made in the next hour would be described and debated for the next generation, and he wanted the record to be unambiguous. Aldous read the charter aloud at his shoulder in the carrying voice of a man who had spent 30 years in council chambers and understood that documents only exist, politically, when they are heard. The assembled lords listened in the quality of silence that the powerful deploy when they are recalibrating without appearing to move. The charter said what Bly had told her it said. Precise. written by lawyers who had been paid for precision by a queen who understood that precision was its own form of armor. Miranda stood at the center of the dais and she did not look at the charter. She had already read it. Bly had described its contents with the careful accuracy of a woman who had memorized them over years of proximity. She knew what it said. What she was watching was the room. She was watching 8 lords adjust. It didn't look like much from the outside. A shifting of weight. A slight recalibration of posture. The particular way a powerful man picks up his wine cup when he is buying time to think. But she had spent 10 years watching powerful men adjust to information they didn't want, and she could read a room the way she read weather. Not through any single sign but through the accumulation of them, the pattern of small movements that together described a direction. 4 of the 8 had already decided. She could see it in the way their shoulders had settled, the way their faces had gone into the careful blankness that lords wore when they had committed to a choice and were waiting for the appropriate moment to announce it. 3 were still calculating. 1 Lord Casson of the Northern Reach, a man she had not yet managed to fully read, was looking at Dorian. She tracked that gaze back to the king and found what she had already suspected. Dorian was not watching the charter. He was not watching the lords. He was not watching Miranda. He was watching Ezra. He let them finish. He let Aldous reach the last paragraph, let the document settle on the table before Fenwick with the unargued weight of Seraphine's seal pressing into the wood. He picked up his own wine cup and drank and set it down and the room waited. "It's an interesting document," Dorian said. His voice was even, almost mild. The voice of a man who has already moved several steps past the move everyone is watching. 18 years ago, the original Charter of Succession was reviewed by a council of 7 lords and found to contain a conditional clause. A clause requiring the bloodline claimant to demonstrate the ash gift before any succession right can be activated. He paused. "This is also in the document. It is in the second page." Lord Aldous, I believe, stopped at the first. Aldous looked down. A long pause. Then, with the controlled expression of a man who cannot lie to a room full of witnesses and has stopped wanting to. "There is a second page." The silence changed quality. Miranda held very still. She had not known about the second page. Bly had not known about the second page. She was already discarding the possibility that Bly had known and stayed silent. The woman had nothing to gain from omission and everything to lose. Which meant the second page was something Dorian had arranged. Or something that had always been there in Bly, who had memorized the visible surface over years of proximity, had simply never turned over. Didn't matter which. What mattered was that the room was listening. "The right of the Ashenmoor bloodline being absolute in principle," Aldous read in the slower, more careful voice of a man translating as he went, "is contingent in practice upon the demonstration of the ash gift, the gift of binding, held by the alpha line of Ashenmoor in succession since the founding of the pack. Should a claimant present themselves before a witnessed assembly, they must demonstrate this gift in the presence of the assembly to confirm the authenticity of their bloodline claim. Without demonstration, no succession right may be lawfully activated, and the current governance of the throne shall stand until such demonstration is made or the claimant withdraws." He set the document down. Every face in the room turned to Miranda. Dorian lifted his wine cup again. A small, precise gesture. "The ash gift," he said, in the tone of a man explaining something patient and inevitable, "has not manifested in the Ashenmoor line for 40 years. Seraphine's daughter did not carry it. It is a recessive expression of bloodline purity, extremely rare, notably absent in a woman who has spent the last decade running from one camp to another." The mildness in his voice was perfect, studied. "I say this not to be unkind. I say it because the law requires demonstration, and I will honor the law. As I have always honored the law." The last sentence landed the way he intended, with the full accumulated weight of 18 years of a man performing legitimacy in front of witnesses who needed to believe it. Miranda looked at him across the length of the dais. She thought about what she knew and what she didn't know. It was a calculation she had made many times in the last year and had learned to make quickly, without flinching from the result. What she knew. The ash gift was real. It was in the charter. It was something the Ashenmoor bloodline had carried, and it was something she had never been told about, because the woman who should have told her had been murdered when Miranda was 5 years old. What she didn't know. Whether she had it. She had spent 10 years being extraordinary in ways that were visible and documentable, strategy and survival, and the particular cold intelligence that had kept her alive when staying alive was statistically improbable. She had spent 10 years being unremarkable in every other way, a woman in the margins of a world that belonged to the people at its center, and she had never, not once, felt anything in herself that she would have called a gift. Except, she thought about the morning in the marshes 8 months ago, when she had woken before the soldiers reached the camp. She had known, not heard, not smelled, not reasoned her way to it, but known with a certainty that sat below the level of logic, that they were coming. She had always attributed it to experience, accumulated instinct, a body trained to read threat. She thought about Ezra in the corridor. The way she had known what he was going to say before he said it. The way she had known what he wanted and what he feared and what he would do, not because she had assessed the evidence, though she had, but because something below the assessment had already told her, quietly, without ceremony, the way a compass needle simply points. She thought about the baby. She thought about the thing she had felt 3 days ago in her room, that she had not let herself examine too closely, the pulse of something deep and unfamiliar, like a second heartbeat that was not hers, like a thread of connection running outward from her center in multiple directions at once. Oh, she thought. Not surprise. Not revelation. The particular stillness of understanding something you have always known, but haven't had the language for. The ash gift was not a performance. It was not something that could be demonstrated on command in front of a crowd. It was something else entirely, and she knew what it was, and she knew in the same moment that Dorian knew what it was, and that this demand in front of witnesses in a room full of wolves was the trap. Because the ash gift was the gift of binding. And the only binding she currently held, the only one active living anchored, was the one between her and Ezra. A bond that he had told her she controlled. A bond she could sever or keep with full authority as the alpha partner. A bond that was, if she demonstrated it publicly, proof of her bloodline beyond any argument Dorian could construct. And also proof, in front of every lord in the room and every pack they represented, that she and Ezra were bound. She stood on the dais and understood the full architecture of it. Dorian had not positioned Ezra at her side as a diplomatic gesture. He had positioned him knowing that if Miranda ever surfaced, which he had spent 18 years ensuring was impossible and had, somewhere in his cold and exhaustive planning, accounted for the possibility of being wrong, she would be handed the one tool that could prove her bloodline and the one witness whose testimony could confirm it. Bound together in plain sight where Miranda would have to choose. Claim the throne by exposing the bond, or protect Ezra from what came after exposure and lose the only demonstration she could make. He built the trap 18 years ago, she thought. He has been waiting for me to walk into it. She looked at Ezra. He was watching her. He had been watching her since Aldous began to read, his face controlled and careful, the face of a man following a logic he had not yet reached the end of, and she watched him get there, watched him arrive at exactly the same place she had, watched his expression move through the particular sequence of a man understanding something he doesn't want to understand. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said nothing. He was waiting. It was the most deliberate act of deference she had seen from him in 3 days, and it was the best thing he could have done, and she understood that he had chosen it, not fallen into it, chosen it with the same cold intelligence he brought to everything. The room was waiting. Dorian was waiting, with the patient certainty of a man who believes he has already won. Miranda took one breath. Then she walked to Ezra. She stopped in front of him. Closer than neutral, close enough that the room read it immediately. The way rooms read proximity between alphas who share a bond, the subtle recalibration of the air between two people connected at a register below conversation. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. You understand what I'm about to do, she said. Quiet. For him only. Yes. You understand what it means. A pause. He was very still. Yes, he said again. She searched his face for the calculation, for the weighing she expected, the man running numbers expression she had learned in 3 days to recognize in him. She found something else instead. Something that had the quality of a decision already made, sitting on the other side of fear, in the particular territory that opens up when you have already committed and what remains is only the enactment. It doesn't obligate you, she said. After tonight. Whatever comes after tonight. Miranda. Her name. Just her name. Not the alpha voice. Not the political voice. Not any of the performed versions of himself she had watched him deploy in 3 days. Just the voice underneath all of it, the plain register of a man speaking from the part of himself that doesn't strategize. I know what I'm doing, he said. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she raised her hand and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his sternum where the bond lived. She felt it immediately, the threat of it, warm and anchored and unmistakably real, and she did something she had never done deliberately, had only ever done by instinct and accident and the blind fumbling of two people thrown together by a manipulation neither of them chose. She opened it. Not severed. Not closed. Open fully, consciously, with the complete authority of the alpha partner who controlled its terms. The way a door is not thrown open in panic but turned on its hinges by a steady hand that knows exactly what it is doing. The bond between them lit like something catching fire. It was not visible. Not in the way fire is visible. But every wolf in the room felt it. Miranda could see it in the way the room moved. The way heads lifted. The way even the guards along the walls shifted with the involuntary recognition of wolves responding to an alpha bond at its fullest expression, unshielded and uncontained. It moved through the room like a wave moves through water, not destroying what it passed through but changing it, the whole medium shifting at once. Lord Fenwick made a sound. Not a word. A breath. The sound of a man who has just had a long-held question answered. Lord Casson, who had been watching Dorian the entire evening, turned. He turned all the way, and when he looked at Miranda his face had the expression of a man who grew up knowing what the ash gift looked like, and has just seen it for the first time in his living memory. Dorian did not move. Miranda looked at him over her shoulder. Her hand still flat against Ezra's chest. The bond opened between them like a lit window in a dark house. The ash gift, she said in the carrying voice she had been building toward for 10 days, is the gift of binding. The ability to establish, hold, and consciously govern an alpha bond. Not through proximity or instinct, but through deliberate authority. It is not recessive. It is not absent. She held Dorian's gaze without blinking. It has been right here. For 8 months. You put it there yourself, my lord, when you sent your nephew to find me. She watched it move across his face. Not fear. Dorian Voss did not fear things the way ordinary men did. He processed them and moved past them with the cold efficiency of a man who has never once in his life stopped to grieve a miscalculation. But the specific expression that preceded the processing, the moment of pure unguarded recognition that the calculation has come out wrong, it lasted less than a second. Then it was gone. And then from the gallery above the great hall, came the sound of a door and a voice and running feet, and a young guard, barely 20 white-faced, appeared at the hall's entrance and crossed the floor to Lord Aldous and bent to his ear. Aldous went very still. He looked up at Miranda. The room shifted again. She read it in Aldous's stillness and understood, before he spoke, that it had not shifted in a direction she was going to like. There is a company of soldiers at the south gate, he said carefully, flying the Iron Veil colors. A pause. Approximately 300. 300. Not a patrol. Not a representative force. An army. Miranda took her hand from Ezra's chest. She turned very slowly and looked at Dorian Voss. He had picked up his wine cup. He drank from it. He set it down with the quiet precision of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment for the last hour, and has found it arriving exactly where he placed it. My nephew commands Iron Veil, he said in the mild and patient voice. Iron Veil's soldiers follow Iron Veil's Alpha. And Iron Veil's Alpha, as of 3 days ago, signed a garrison agreement placing those soldiers under my tactical authority for the duration of this court. He looked at Ezra. Before he knew who she was. The room understood. Miranda watched them understand. 300 soldiers at the south gate meant the castle was surrounded. It meant the assembled lords were guests who could not leave without permission. It meant the adjudication, the public witnessed legally initiated adjudication she had moved so carefully into position, could be suspended under emergency military provision, which was old law and ugly law and the kind of law that had been written by kings for exactly this purpose. She stood on the dais and breathed once. He is 3 moves ahead, she thought. He has always been 3 moves ahead. She thought about the baby who was quiet right now, already learning it seemed to wait. And then she thought about something else. Something Bly had said to her in the linen corridor, before the document, before all of this. Something Miranda had filed at the time under context rather than ammunition, and had not revisited until this exact moment. There are those who came to this court because they were invited, Bly had said. And there are those who came because they were positioned. Miranda looked at the room. She looked at the 8 lords, the 4 who had already decided, the 3 still calculating, and Lord Casson, who was no longer watching Dorian and was no longer watching Miranda and was now watching the southgate side of the hall with a very specific quality of attention that she had just, in the last 30 seconds, learned to read correctly. Not concern. Not surprise. Recognition. Lord Casson, Miranda said. He turned. She looked at him with the full, direct attention she usually kept for private rooms. No performance. No political distance. The clear and unambiguous attention of a woman who has just understood something and is naming it before it can be buried. Your soldiers are already inside the walls, she said. It was not a question. Lord Casson of the Northern Reach, who had spent the entire evening watching Dorian with the expression of a man waiting for a signal, looked at Miranda Ashenmoor for a long moment. Then he stood up. They are, he said. They have been here since yesterday morning. Hidden among my retinue on my order. Because I have been in contact with this woman for 6 months. He said it to the room, to Aldous, to Fenwick, to the guards and servants and every witness in the hall. Because I knew she was coming. And I chose my side before I arrived. He looked at Miranda, and something in his face had the quality of a man settling a very old debt. My lady, he said. The south gate is covered. What do you need? Dorian Voss set down his wine cup. This time he did not pick it up again. The room held the shape of the silence for exactly as long as it took Dorian Voss to understand that the silence was no longer his. Miranda watched him understand it. She had been watching him process information for 3 days and she knew by now the particular quality of his stillness when he was calculating rather than decided. And what she saw in him now was not calculation. The calculation was over. What she was watching was a man arriving at the end of a very long road, and finding something waiting there that was not what he had built the road for. He was not afraid. She had not expected fear. What she had not expected was what she found instead, which was something closer to relief. It moved across his face so briefly that she might have missed it if she had been watching the room. But she was watching him and she saw it, and it was the first unrehearsed thing she had seen from Dorian Voss in 3 days. It arrived and was gone and left behind it the careful blankness he had worn for 18 years. But she had seen it, and it changed the geometry of everything she thought she understood about what this evening was supposed to be. She turned to Casson. Hold the gate, she said. No engagement. Nobody in or out. He nodded, already signaling, and his second had the message out the door before Aldous had fully absorbed what had just happened. Miranda stepped down from the dais. Not away from it, toward Dorian. A deliberate direction. She crossed the space between them while every lord in the room recalibrated in her peripheral vision. The 4 decided, the 3 calculating, all 7 doing the arithmetic of which way the floor was tilting and choosing accordingly. She did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes on Dorian and walked until she was close enough to speak quietly, and then she stopped. You kept the charter, she said. Not the carrying voice. Not the voice for witnesses. The private register. You kept it in the original locked registry, and you left Seraphine's seal intact. You had 18 years to destroy it and you did not destroy it. Dorian looked at her. No, he said. Why? It was not a question with a rising note. It was a question with the flat finality of a woman who has earned the right to an answer, and is not going to pretend otherwise. He was quiet for a moment. In the quiet she could hear the hall, the breathing of the assembled witnesses, the faint sound of someone moving in the gallery above, the particular quality of a large room full of wolves holding still because 2 alphas in the center of it are doing something that the wolves in the room understand to be significant even if the human politics around it are unclear. Seraphine wrote it herself, he said finally. The second page. She wrote it 3 weeks before she died, and she gave it to the registrar without my knowledge, and she told him that if it was ever destroyed it would mean she had been right about me. Miranda waited. She was not wrong about me, he said. About what I would do. About what I was capable of. She was exact about that. She always was. He said it without effect. A statement of record. But she was wrong about one thing. She believed I would destroy the evidence once she was gone. And I found that I could not. Not because I disagreed with what I had done. Not because I regretted the path I had chosen. But because... He stopped. Miranda watched him find the word and decide against it, choose a different approach. A man who has spent 18 years never once allowing himself the word he needed. She said it for him. Because it was the last thing she made, Miranda said. And you couldn't finish. He looked at her for a long time. You have her eyes, he said. I had not expected that. It was the most unguarded thing she had ever heard from him. It arrived in the middle of the room with the exposed quality of something that has been stored in the dark for 18 years and doesn't know, in the sudden light, what shape it is anymore. Miranda looked at the man who had killed her mother and taken her throne and spent 18 years building walls around what he had done, and she felt something that was not forgiveness and not sympathy and not any of the clean emotions she might have preferred. It was more complicated than that. It was the feeling of understanding a person with complete clarity and finding that clarity was not the same as absolution. Not for him and not for herself. Why Ezra, she said. Of all the men you could have sent. Because he would survive it, Dorian said simply. Every other man I might have sent would have been destroyed by you or by the attempt or by both. Ezra would survive. I have never once in his life underestimated what he is capable of surviving. A pause. I perhaps underestimated what he was capable of choosing. Miranda absorbed this. You thought the bond would control him, she said. I thought the bond would complicate him, Dorian said. As it was designed to. I did not account for the possibility that he would understand what you were before I did. And what am I? He looked at her with the precise, assessing attention of a man who has been a king for 18 years and knows exactly what kingship costs, and is about to say something he has only had the ability to think in the last hour. Exactly what Seraphine was, he said. And considerably better at surviving it. The room had been quiet. It had the specific quality of quiet that forms around a conversation when everyone in hearing range understands they are witnessing something that will be repeated for years, and is choosing to listen. Miranda held Dorian Voss's gaze for a final moment. Then she turned to face the room. She did not go back to the dais. She stayed where she was, in the center of the floor, where the document and the demonstration and Cassin's revelation had already done the work of positioning her. And she looked at the assembled lords and she spoke in the carrying voice, the one built for rooms and witnesses and the specific frequency of things that need to be remembered. I am going to say something that I want recorded, she said. By every secretary in this hall. Verbatim. She gave them a moment. Lord Dorian Voss held this throne for 18 years by a method that this court will not relitigate tonight. The history of that tenure belongs to a process of examination that will take months and will be conducted properly, by a council of lords with authority and scope that I will establish by charter before the new moon. I am not interested in a spectacle. I am interested in a record. She looked at the 4 decided lords, who were now decisively decided. I am also not interested in a court that rewards the men who chose correctly in the last hour and forgets the men who chose correctly 3 months ago, or 3 years ago, or never had the position to choose at all. If there is going to be a reckoning, it will be a complete one, and it will follow rules I can stand behind in 20 years. We will not do this in a room at midnight because the military balance just shifted. Lord Fenwick, who had held the charter and read its seal and whose face had been doing a number of complicated things for the last 40 minutes, looked at her and said, What do you want us to do tonight, my lady? Tonight, Miranda said. You go to your rooms. All of you. The castle is under Cassin's security and mine until morning. Tomorrow we begin the formal process. Nobody leaves without my knowledge. Nobody makes promises in corridors about what they'll support and what they need in exchange. She looked at the room with the clear and unambiguous gaze of a woman who has been living in the margins for a decade, and has learned every way that power corrodes from the edges. This court has had 18 years of that kind of governance. It is done now. Silence. Then Aldous, who was old enough and careful enough to know which way this had turned and had the particular dignity of a man who had made peace with change before change arrived. Yes, my lady. The rest followed. Not eagerly. They were lords, and lords did not perform eagerness, but with the settled, non-arguing quality of men who had assessed the situation and found their assessments resolving in the same direction. Dorian Voss did not speak. She looked at him one last time. "You will be confined to your chambers tonight," she said. "With guards. 2 of Cassin's men and 1 of yours. So that the record shows no particular partisan interest in what you are confined with. Tomorrow a council member will meet with you to discuss the terms of what comes next." She paused. "You will be treated according to the law." "Exactly according to the law. Not because I am making a gesture, but because that is what the law requires and I will follow it." He inclined his head. "Precisely. The nod of a man who has operated within legal structure for 18 years and recognizes it when it is genuinely meant." Then he walked to the door, and the guards fell in beside him, and he left the great hall of Ashenmoor Castle without looking back, which was, Miranda understood, the only kind of exit a man like Dorian Voss could make and maintain what he had left of himself. She let him have it. The room began to move. The careful, purposeful dispersal of powerful people who have somewhere to be and plans to remake. Miranda stood in the center of the floor, and let herself be still for exactly 10 seconds. Then she turned. Ezra was where she had left him. He had not moved during any of it, not during Cassin's declaration, not during her conversation with Dorian, not during the dismissal of the lords. He had stood at the edge of the dais with the particular stillness of a man who understands that the most useful thing he can do right now is not add to the complexity of the room. She crossed to him. He watched her come, and there was nothing calculated in his face, which was something she had learned in 3 days to treat as data. When the calculation was present, she could see it. When it was absent, it meant something. She stopped in front of him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The hall was emptying around them. Servants, guards, secretaries finding their purposes and their exits. The candles had burned lower, the late-night quality of the light shifting the room into something softer and more private than it had been an hour ago. "You signed the garrison agreement," she said. "I did. Before you knew." "Yes." She looked at him. The bond was still open between them. She had not closed it after the demonstration, had not found the moment or the reason, and she could feel it now the way she imagined you feel a healed scar, present and warm and carrying its history without obscuring it. She was aware of him in a way that was not assessment, not strategy, not the careful professional attention she had paid him since the marshes. It was something else. Something she did not have the right vocabulary for yet and did not, she decided, need to translate immediately. "The garrison agreement gives him tactical authority over your soldiers," she said. "It did," Ezra said. "Until approximately 20 minutes ago, when I sent a rider to the south gate with a counterorder and my seal." She looked at him. "You can't do that," she said. "You signed." "I have the right, as Ironvale Alpha, to rescind tactical authority granted under emergency provision in any case where the emergency provision is being used against the interests of the pack." He said it with the tone of a man who has memorized the relevant law and was waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Ironvale's interest is not served by surrounding a legitimate claimant's adjudication with 300 soldiers. A pause. "Arguably. I would have argued it. I was fairly confident I would win." Miranda stared at him. "When did you send the rider?" she said. "When Aldous started reading the second page." She breathed out. "You anticipated." "I saw the document," he said. "I know my uncle. I know what a second page means when my uncle is in the room." He looked at her with the clear, level gaze that she had been reading for 3 days and was beginning to understand contained, underneath the assessment, a quality she had been misidentifying as distance. "I told you I would not be used against you. I meant that with or without the bond. I meant it when I didn't know who you were." He stopped. "What?" she said. "I mean it more now," he said. "Which I did not expect." The hall was nearly empty. A few guards at the far walls, deliberately not looking at the 2 alphas in the center of the room, which was the appropriate and professional choice and which Miranda was grateful for. She looked up at Ezra. She thought about all the things she needed to say, the bond and what opening it had meant and what keeping it meant, and the fact that she had done it in front of witnesses which made it something that could not be quietly undone, and the fact that she did not want to quietly undo it, which was the most clarifying thought she had had in 3 days and possibly in several years. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right. I opened the bond tonight because I needed to demonstrate the gift," she said. That is true. That was the reason. She held his gaze. It is not the only reason. He was very still. There is a difference, she said carefully, between a bond that was placed on you by someone else's manipulation and a bond that you choose. I know that. I am not going to stand in front of you and tell you that what you're feeling is entirely your own choice when it was created by someone else's engineering. That wouldn't be honest, and she stopped. Started again. I need to be honest with you about what I know and what I want and what I can't promise. What can't you promise? He said. Quiet. Genuinely asking. That this will be simple, she said. That I will be easy to know. That the crown doesn't change the terms of everything in ways neither of us can currently predict. She paused. That the baby doesn't. He was quiet for a long moment. What can you promise? He said. She thought about it. The actual question, not the political version of it. What she knew for certain, in the deep and unargued way that the Ash gift seemed to operate, below logic, below strategy, in the register that had been quietly telling her true things for 10 years before she had the language for it. That I chose this, she said. Tonight. What I did tonight. I chose it knowing what it would cost and knowing what it would mean, and I would choose it again. She looked at him. I chose you. Not the bond. You. Something moved through his face that she didn't have a word for, and decided she didn't need one for immediately. He reached up and covered her hand with his, the hand she had pressed against his sternum, and held it there, over the bond, over the warmth of it, and she felt the thing she had opened earlier settle into something that was not the engineered compulsion of a manipulated binding but something chosen, something standing on the other side of all the architecture and the politics and the 18 years of someone else's planning, simply present. All right, he said. She looked at him. All right, he said again, with the quiet finality of a man who has made a decision he doesn't need to examine further. Then I choose you back. In front of whoever is left in this room to witness it. She looked around the hall. 3 guards and a secretary who had developed an urgent interest in organizing documents at the far end of the room. She looked back at Ezra. Something that had been held very tightly in her chest for a very long time quietly let go. She slept that night in her mother's rooms. Not from sentiment, from practicality, from the fact that Cassin's men needed a clear center of authority to orient to, and the symbolic geography of a castle mattered in ways that were real and operational. She told herself this while Bly was establishing the room and confirming the guard rotation, and she believed it. And it was also true that when she was finally alone, she stood for a long time at the window and looked out at the dark and felt the shape of a history that had been building toward this room for 35 years. Seraphine had stood at this window. She had stood here before Miranda existed, making plans and writing documents and understanding, with the particular intelligence of a woman who had spent a lifetime watching what powerful men did to inconvenient women, that the most important thing she could do was build something that outlasted what was coming for her. You built it right, Miranda thought. All of it. I just had to find it. She put her hand against the stone of the window frame. The cold of it. The realness. She had a throne. She had Cassin's soldiers and 4 lords who had declared themselves in 3, who would by morning, and the legal and witness demonstration of the Ash gift in a hall full of witnesses. She had a charter with 2 pages and a seal that had outlasted the woman who made it by 18 years. She had a process to build and a council to establish, and a man who had held this throne by methods that would require months of careful examination. She had a great deal of work, and she found, standing at her mother's window in the dark, not afraid of it. She was something else. Something that was closer to the feeling of a compass needle settling, the deep structural relief of orientation after a very long period without it. She pressed her hand harder against the stone. The bond, quiet now, warm and steady at the center of her. She felt it and found it good. The baby. She pressed her other hand against her stomach and felt the particular presence she was beginning to understand, the one that was not quite hers and was entirely hers, the small and accumulating certainty of a life in progress. I know, she thought. I'm figuring it out. She stood at the window until the dark began at its edges, to consider the gray that came before dawn. Then she turned from it and went to the desk where Bly had left a candle burning, and she sat down and she began to write. Not a proclamation. Not a charter. A list. The plain working list of a woman who has arrived at the beginning of a very large task and is starting, as she has always started, with what she knows and what she needs to find out and what cannot wait. She wrote until the gray became light and the light became morning and the castle began, around her, to do what castles do on significant days. Shift and settle and remake itself for whoever is living in it now, the way all structures do, with the slow and fundamental indifference of stone to the drama of the human beings who occupy it. Outside the birds. Inside the candle burning down. Miranda Ashenmoor, daughter of Seraphine, alpha of the Ash line, queen of a thing she was still learning the weight of, bent her head over her list and worked. If this story is staying with you the way Miranda's journey has stayed with me, like a compass needle finally settling, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know who's out here at the edge of dawn with me.